I'm making this video as an appeal to young men. I believe you have been treated horribly by feminists and the culture they have created, and I know that conservatives are interested in recruiting you to their cause, and there is a lot of messaging directed at you from the right to get you on their side. Conservatism has many good things to offer as an ideology. What I find most appealing about conservatives is their understanding that in order to have a healthy society, you need healthy people. Conservatives understand that individuals need to take responsibility for their own success in life and for being good people. However, the conservative movement is also a political movement with a vested interest in advancing its own ideology, and this requires gaining power in order to enact policy. This means that the interests of the Republican Party and the pundits and politicians who support it are fundamentally driven by the need to gain political power, and this means that their first considerations will not always be what is in your best interests. If you believe in conservatism, then you absolutely should support the movement and actively participate in the Republican Party. Democracy relies on participation from regular citizens, and it is those who choose to be active in politics who are most likely to have their voices heard. If you think Donald Trump will be a good president, then you should step up to support him. However, it is also important to recognize that you are working alongside powerful people with their own interests who benefit from a system which has become corrupt and dysfunctional. I have also often seen the right make emotional appeals to young men in order to gain their support, but I am not convinced that the right has ever made an adequate effort to actually address their struggles, and I see young men being exploited as a political constituency than having their interests cast aside for political convenience. As one example, the right presents the family as an answer for young men's need for purpose, as well as a healthier outlet for their sexual needs than attempting to be successful in the toxic dating market, which results from a society that praises casual sex over commitment. Many men in our society right now are also struggling to form intimate relationships and are feeling a deep sense of hurt as a result. In the dynamics of sexual competition in a society which fails to place adequate value on monogamous commitment results in large numbers of sexually desperate men, while simultaneously enabling women to treat men as expendable props, fueling a destructive sense of entitlement, which results in men being treated as inferior. This is especially painful for young men who crave sexual intimacy and want women to respect them, and also incentivizes a culture in which women's needs are centered while men are treated as subhuman, and women have the ability to casually discard men if they fail to get what they want. It is also because of the social advantages which women enjoy that sexism directed toward men is commonplace, even though the left expects us to frown on sexism when it's directed toward women. I've been following gender-related issues for over a decade at this point, and the culture war which has morphed into our current toxic political climate basically started when some people realized that, contrary to popular assumptions, men were equally likely to be victims of rape and domestic abuse as women. Drinking some water. People were also becoming aware of the horrific experiences these men suffered from as a result of cultural stigmas against men who are perceived as weak or sexually impotent. This posed a threat to the political interests of feminists, who responded by launching a moral crusade which any sane person should have recognized as abhorrent, to ensure that these men's suffering would continue to be treated as of lesser importance than that of women. These political motives were driven by the desire to establish equality of outcome between men and women in every sphere of life in which doing so would benefit women, although feminists at the time saw it as desirable for fewer men than women to graduate from college and for women to dominate the professional world as a result. This was justified in their minds, and in the minds of radical leftists in general, by the belief that men, and especially white men, are privileged, so it is impossible for sexism against men to exist, and any men who might be hurt in the process of feminists' pursuit of their political aims are acceptable collateral damage, because they have unfairly benefited from the patriarchy. This is the same ideology that has been taught to successive generations of young men by the same elders who should be supporting them and encouraging them to be successful, that the world is a better place if they fail. In response, the right promises a vision in which men are valued as husbands and fathers, and in which their contributions to society are desirable, and there are good reasons to embrace this vision. I believe that when men and women embrace their sexuality in healthy ways that lead to successful relationships, the creation of a family is the most likely outcome, and that this is something society should cherish. I also believe that when men's struggles include sexual failure, it is our responsibility to acknowledge our own shortcomings and improve ourselves in ways that make us both more attractive to women and better people. The reason why we should care about the suffering of men due to loneliness and lack of romantic prospects is not because men are intrinsically entitled to sex, but because masculinity has been actively demonized by a misandric culture, resulting in men being afraid to manifest the qualities that women find desirable, none of which makes them inherently unworthy of love. And they should be provided with an alternative set of ideas to help them integrate their masculine qualities, which have been repressed, in a way which leads to a productive outcome. However, loss of masculinity is not the only reason why men are not seeking out marriage. Under the current legal regime, men who marry women risk having their lives ruined during a potential divorce. A movement to restore the values of marriage and family, which actually cares about the well-being of men, should be in favor of reforming divorce laws to eliminate these problems. Instead, most conservative thought leaders have focused on an ideological crusade against the idea of divorce. As a result, the proposed solution is to abolish no-fault divorce, which would incentivize women to make false accusations of abuse in order to gain a favorable settlement, a tactic which is often encouraged by corrupt lawyers and which results in ruining the man's life. Another area in which conservatives have a strong political investment is abortion. I personally believe that this is fully justified. Abortion past the point where the baby has begun to develop consciousness, which is a few weeks into pregnancy, is a moral abomination which should be outlawed. However, pro-life activists tend to take a compassionate approach toward women in difficult circumstances which might lead them to want an abortion, but there is no evidence that they feel any of the same compassion toward the men who are at risk of having a crippling financial burden placed on them. One pro-life organization which I have seen advertised frequently on conservative channels I watch is Preborn, which seeks out women who are considering an abortion and encourages them to choose the life of the infant. I have also seen interviews in the past with Lila Rose, the leader of a popular pro-life organization called Live Action, which I think has done genuinely good work. Lila Rose laments the fact that pregnant women find themselves under pressure from their boyfriends, presumably also the child's father. She is expressing compassion for the mother who is in a difficult circumstance, but shows no concern whatsoever for the man facing financial ruin. The pro-life movement has also made no effort over the years to promote sex education, which shows poor political strategy if their highest priority is genuine protection of the rights of the unborn. Recently, conservatives have also raised concerns about the potentially harmful side effects of birth control, but have made no effort to promote alternative means of preventing unwanted pregnancy for couples who wish to experience intimacy. In fact, many conservatives are quite hostile towards sexuality and justify their positions by portraying men who want sex for purposes other than procreation as predators exploiting women for their own pleasure. The pattern is consistent and paints conservative ideologues' motivation toward men in an extremely ugly light. The implications of the biases behind the conservative stand on abortion are also becoming much more evident now that Roe v. Wade has been overturned, with the result that conservatives are now facing increased opposition among women, and I think that prominent conservatives are attempting to gain support from women by promoting misandry. This can be seen at turning point conferences, where men who fall short of conservative social expectations are demeaned in front of crowds of women who are encouraged to weaponize sex in order to pressure men to marry them. Michael Knowles is another prominent conservative with a long history of demonizing men whose behavior falls outside his narrow, ideologically motivated expectations, while at the same time demanding special treatment for women. All of this means that men who want to join the conservative movement need to be prepared to advocate for their own interests. Trying to avoid this task by walking away from conservatism is also not the answer. Supporting a movement you believe in and calling on it to do better is a positive act of good, and choosing not to do so out of fear only helps misandrists who hide behind traditional conservatism win. What is important is the willingness to say no. Any man with dating experience who has awareness of what is in his own best interests understand that women respect strength in men. Seeing that you are willing to maintain your boundaries, even in the face of possible conflict and even walking away from them, increases their respect for you. This is manly behavior. When you engage with fellow conservatives, act like a man. While you might face some resistance from female Karens in the movement, conservatives broadly tend to be much more open-minded than the left, and much more willing to engage in self-reflection. So I do not believe that persuading them to change is an impossible task, although you should be prepared to take well-intentioned criticism and counter-arguments in response. It is also common for misandrists with right-wing leanings to attack transgender women as a proxy for men. While you might disagree with the left that it is factually correct to refer to trans women as women, or share their concerns about children being groomed, it's important to distinguish between well-intentioned concerns coming from a place of compassion and hate. Pay attention to any attempts to paint transgender women as a threat, and if it is coming from a place of negative judgment toward trans women, and does so while treating trans women as a monolith, then that should be a red flag. If you hear them say anything that is evidently coming from a place of hatred, then trans women aren't the real target. The real target is you. And the beneficiaries are narcissistic women who lack any of the values that make conservatism a desirable ideology. With that being said, if you're going to stand up for yourself, you should be prepared to face backlash. I've been involved in the Libertarian Party, and I found there that party politics often led to some pretty nasty interpersonal dynamics. While this may be partly due to libertarian ideological orthodoxy, often creating cover for toxic behavior in relationships, some of it was also due to factional loyalties trumping reason, and this is not something that any political party will be immune to. It's important to conduct yourself in a way that shows maturity, which is a quality that conservatives will value. Even if you're being treated unfairly, it's a good idea to show that you're the better person. It's also surprisingly easy to get dishonest people to tell on themselves if you can identify the parts of their statement which reveal their weaknesses. There's a trick to it, and it might be a good idea to pay attention to your gut feelings about people, and when you sense BS, identify the turns of phrase that raise red flags or contradictions between what they've either said or insinuated, or simply evidence through their actions to learn what to look for. It's extremely helpful to be willing to ask people the questions they don't want to be asked. I was having a conversation with a friend about doing this with women, and he reminded me that it's important to be fair in how you judge someone while you're exposing them. What I tried to do during a recent conversation over Discord with a female acquaintance who was acting in bad faith was to respond to her evasions by taking what she said at face value and answering in a way which would be fair and reasonable if she was actually telling the truth, but which I knew would make her uncomfortable. It didn't take her long to melt down and post a rant in which she admitted to behavior that was even worse than I realized. Another thing manly men do is support each other. If you see other men who share your concerns, then it's important for you to stick together and have each other's backs. People who work together are going to be more politically successful than people who are trying to do their own thing and are too insecure to ask for help or lack the skills to provide it in an effective manner. My advice is to find good men and build trust and reach a point where you feel comfortable being vulnerable. Because while hiding your vulnerability may be a good strategy when dealing with emotionally toxic women, and while strength is part of manliness, you are also trying to fix problems which ultimately come down to men being hurt on a deep emotional level, which is spiritually degrading and demoralizing. And it's important for men to be able to properly communicate their hurt in order to take action to correct its cause. I'm thirsty. I hope that there are conservative young men who see this and hear what I've said here. From what I've heard, I believe that you are not alone. I watch Whatifalthist, who is a man in his early 20s who started off doing alternate history content, such as what would happen if Hitler won World War II, but now does political commentary and is someone I recommend watching. He also has contact with a lot of disaffected young men, and has predicted for years that America will have a revolution in support of the far right carried out by young men. His predictions for the future are pretty dark, but I believe there is also a chance for the young men in this category to be a significant force for good in the world. You are not worthless despite what feminists have told you. And the response to the ways you've been hurt is not to fall into despair, but to fight back by speaking up and making your voices heard. Feminists and radical leftists will not listen to you, but conservatives might. I also share the temptation toward despair, and I find that hopelessness often feels comfortable because it allows me to feel like a victim. It is tempting to use this as justification for my own failures, but it can also lead to feeling justified in hurting others, which offers a sense of power. And the feelings of injustice which might motivate these tendencies on the part of young men are fully justified. But the power offered by moral self-righteousness is an illusion, and the acts of revenge which tempt us will only further alienate people and make the voices of those who give in to them less credible. We cultivate power not by asserting our moral virtue, but by proving it, and by fighting our enemies in ways that are aimed at winning and destroying the reprehensible system which has caused us all so much hurt, and ensuring that the next generation of men will face a better world. To do otherwise is to give in to weakness and give credibility to those who seek to humiliate us.